Good morning, everybody. Good morning. People who went to summer camp help those who did not go to summer camp. Good morning. All right, well done. My name is Doug Bauer, and I'm the executive director of the Clark Foundation here in New York City. I'm also an adjunct faculty member at the Columbia Business School. And just to make sure, like when you're on the plane, I want to make sure we're all going to the same destination. This is Impact Investors, spreading social innovation. So if this is not your destination, you can leave now. I'm really delighted that you're all here. This is a great turnout. Very, very excited about our guest speakers today about this particular topic. And I'll introduce them in just a second. This is a very important topic at a very important time. I don't need to go into the economic and political dynamics that we're currently experiencing, both domestically as well as internationally. You know what that's all about. The challenges for philanthropy and the civil society, the social sector, in this time are very interesting and very profound. The resources that we need in order to tackle the various social and environmental problems that we are facing, both domestically and internationally, are huge. So the question of what kind of resources, how we utilize them, how we leverage them, is not only a philanthropic question, it is a question for the markets. And impact investing is really looking at that intersection between social and environmental change and the role of the markets and what they can do. And so you're very, very fortunate and very, very lucky this morning to have two of, in my estimation, and I will fully admit I'm a homer, but two of the real leaders in the impact investing movement, Charly and Lisa Kleissner. They're the co-founders of the KL Felicitas Foundation, and you can read their bios. They have tremendous experience. But to me, and I've had the pleasure of working with Charly and Lisa when I was an advisor to their work, and to be honest, I learned more from them than they probably from me, but that's another story. Worked with Charly and Lisa in the startup of their foundation. And to me, they epitomize what I think is fantastic about Silicon Valley in terms of entrepreneurship, obviously, leadership, boldness, the willingness to take risk, the entrepreneurial spirit, and the ability to be nimble about all of these issues that we are facing. And you're going to hear about that in just a second from the two of them. What I want to do really quickly before we unleash Charly and Lisa on you, is that a fair way of putting it? Is to get a little sense of who's in the room. First thing I want to know is MBA students? Okay, great. And I'm throwing in also SEPA, and so MBA, SEPA, et cetera. Still, let's just see a show of hands again. All right, great. All right, terrific. Alumni? Fantastic. Other professionals? Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Professionals, non-students, how many of you are in finance, Wall Street stuff? Can we see a show of hands? Interesting. Finance, not Wall Street, just to be really clear. We're not going to have any Occupy Wall Street folks up here today, probably, so you're all right. Okay, so not that many in finance. Very interesting. Very quick kind of shout out. What are some of the folks doing here? Like Clemens, you run a social... Right, okay. Other examples of strategic planning at IBM? Okay, JP Morgan doing business analysis. Yes, sir? Interesting. Attorney, social investment. Yes, sir? Great. Hi, Kerwin. How are you? So, investing in social cap. Investing social cap. I'm sorry. Why don't you say it again, Kerwin?
Community development, venture capital.
Right. Community development, venture capital. Yes. And yes, exactly. A couple other examples. Yes, ma'am. Okay, very good. So doing social impact work in a wealth management firm. Yes, yes, ma'am. One more. Okay, international development. All right, so interesting cross-section. Yes? You want to share? Okay, so doing development and fundraising for Goodwill International, one of the largest nonprofits in the world, actually. So very good. All right, interesting cross-section. How many of you know about impact investing? Wow, all right. Interesting. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're probably going to dispense with basic definitions, etc., and probably try and get into some of the meat of impact investing. So, fantastic. Thank you for that quick demographic profile. One other thing we want to do, just to get a sense and a pulse of the group, is what are some of the questions? Can we have is there one, do you have a question that you want to have answered before you leave here at about 10 of 11? Yes, sir. Yes. Okay, so to spend some time talking about early stage and angel investing.
We've
Great
got
question.
a lot of experience there.
Okay. Yes, they do. And you should talk about that. Good. Yes, Clemens.
Just maybe a little bit about what in your own journey had to do with your values transition so that it became the centerpiece of what you both stand for.
Okay, I think you're going to hear about that in just a few minutes. Good. Good question. Yes, sir. Okay. Impact investment into Africa. Good. Yes, sir, in the back. Okay, where does individual private philanthropy fit in all of this? Very good question. All right, two more. Yes.
How you approach the issue of accountability for people who are used to traditional investments now with the new asset class.
Okay, so what's the role of accountability and measurement around these, and how do you? Okay, yes, we will cover that.
But this is not a new asset class.
Yes, yes. Despite what Jamie Dimon may think. Okay, yes, Nathan. Okay, so the balance between higher returns and higher impact, social impact in particular. Fantastic. Yes, I think that will be all right. One more, yes, ma'am. Right, so how do you measure social impact, that, especially elements of social impact that are not easily quantified? Very good. Did you go to Wharton? No, just checking. Okay, it's a joke. All right, very good, fantastic. Well, thank you for that. Here's what we're going to do. I think Charly and Lisa, the first thing is, and this will get to what, maybe tell a little bit about your story and your journey as to how you got into impact investing. And let's start there, and then we're going to then talk more about the model that you've been pursuing with KL Felicitas. All right? So, Charly and Lisa, take it away.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I met Charly at an airport, which was, I didn't know at the time, was indicative of the rest of our life. But we spent a lot of time in airports, yeah. But let me just cut to the chase on, first of all, we had a big upside in '99. I think a lot of you know there was this little blip on the screen if you look at the S&P 500. Well, we participated in that directly in Silicon Valley. We both had worked for companies, and many of them went public that year. But we were busy. We were very busy, 24/7. We had 2 kids, and we didn't do anything with that money. We just let it sit. We let it sit. And the following year, in January, February, we decided to go visit with an investment guy. And he pushed out a bunch of paper on the table, and he said, here's some things you might want to do with that money. And it was the first time that it dawned on me, someone who had always earned my money, that all of a sudden my money was going to earn money. And I first thought was, this is more money than I've ever had in my life. Why would I need more? And so when I got over that sort of stupid thought, then I thought, well, if we're going to make more money, why don't we do it in a way that benefits other people? And I'm having all of this thinking going on while we're having the conversation with the investment gentleman. And then he shows me all these different, and Charly's sitting there, and Charly knows much more about this. He took time to educate himself about the industry, the investment industry. But I was busy doing architecture and taking care of 2 kids. So I was a little naive about it, and I think in that naivete is what sort of parlayed, moved the discussion to how can we align this action that we're doing right now with our personal values, and what are our personal values? So we started to have a husband and wife discussion after we decided that we wouldn't move forward on any investments, and we went home, and this discussion went on for some time. And the markets started to dive. And so we sat in a cash position while the markets went down, which was good. because by the time that they reemerged and it was time to invest, we had somewhat of a clear idea, but we didn't have a way to do it because what was available then? SRIs. And something about negative strategies just didn't sound right. So we begrudgingly agreed to launch out, and we did actually. If you look at our portfolio, we have a historical, we do a little slideshow where we share very granular information about our portfolio over time. You'll see this little blip of SRIs early on because we invested quite heavily there. But we didn't like the concept, so we decided to get out of that and start to look more positively and across asset class for whatever was out there. That journey really started in earnest probably between 2003, 2004 when we switched advisories, and we got really lucky. We met a young man, Raul Pomares. He's not that young anymore, particularly since he's been working for us. And he decided that he believed in the concept, didn't know exactly what that was going to mean, but he was going to go out and school himself and see if he could help us find the investments that we were looking for across asset class in all different structures, and basically agnostic. We were really looking for best of breed. And so here we are, fast forward, it's 2011, and we have moved our foundation portfolio. I think we're about 80% into impact investing, moving out of legacy investments we had when we were parking essentially the cash. And we've also opened up, we have 5 structures that we do investing out of. So we have a family limited partnership that we do impact investing from. We have, we did a carve out in which we call Twist, TWIIST, which is our way of doing seed capital investments in small enterprise. And we also have a CRT, our Flipcret, and then our foundation. And all of these entities have different rules and regs, so we're looking at how does that impact, and how can we inform our peers about what those constraints could be to enable them to do impact investing across, hopefully in any of the instruments that they have cash in. So.
Okay, well, great summary. I immigrated together with Lisa in 1986 from Austria to Silicon Valley, and I was on the track of becoming a professor, and turned out that I'm a much better entrepreneur than a professor, and so that was fortuitous to be able to go to Silicon Valley, and switched from working for big companies. So I do resonate with the IBMers and Digital Equipment Corporation and all those folks. And since we were in Silicon Valley, we both decided that it's good for me to go on the startup track. I usually was the VP of engineering, CTO type of person, senior person on the technical team. I have a PhD in computer science, and got to work for Steve Jobs at Next, working for the operating system that's now OS 10, and data mining, and Ariba, business-to-business e-commerce company, where I was privileged to help architect and deliver world's biggest transaction system on the planet. And I think the value question is an important one for me individually and for us together. And the reason I explain what I did is to give you a sense of that we pretty much always worked in areas where the majority of the people would say you can never be successful. And whatever you do, is really not going to work out. And it turns out that they were always wrong, and in our instance, we were always right. 3 consecutive startups that were financially very, very successful, created really not only a lot of wealth for the shareholders of the companies that we were involved in, but also for ourselves, which was a side effect of what we were actually wanting to do. So we were not there to make a lot of money, but I was there to make a great career in technology and make a huge impact on the lives of millions of people using technology. And so when I achieved that when I was 43, normally then at that point in time you get actually the offers to continue what you're doing, and everybody caters to your ego and says, Charlie is so great, can you do the next startup for me? And based on our conversations of what we wanted to accomplish in our lives, we thought that we can do actually better. We can have a bigger impact, a positive impact in our lives individually and jointly by not taking the next CTO role, by not taking the next role in creating the next startup that we know so well how to do. But the wealth that came our way, we did not confuse really, and we talked about this a lot, as our wealth, Charly and Lisa's wealth. We do not confuse the opportunity that we have in the universe to actually show what to do with wealth in a positive way, which is not that easy to do, with the illusion that we are geniuses and therefore we created so much wealth. And so that attitude, I think, is really the core of our motivation and the core of what we do, because it is in alignment with the deep humanity, with who we are on a, not on the VP of engineering level and the job title level, but who we are as a human being with a soul that goes beyond the ego. And so with that motivation, you cannot really work with the status quo anymore, because the status quo usually is not motivated from that perspective. And Lisa and I had long discussions about, in 2003, 2004, that we do not want to work with the people who are not value aligned anymore. We do not accept intermediaries who want to maximize their own financial returns, with us, because it's not about this. This, coupled with the geopolitical and demographic realization that the humanity and the globe, in essence, is really headed towards a fairly hard brick wall with respect to resource constraints, etc., also prompted us to ask the status quo about, we don't believe the status quo of economists who say just because they don't understand how things fit together in a systemic, holistic way, they conveniently declare these things as externalities. And I mean, how ridiculous is that? I mean, am I an externality because I'm holistic? No, I'm part of the universe, I'm part of here, right? Is the fact that I care about resources on a sustainable way an externality? No, it's an internality, right? And so we need to really re-educate systemically the way that the system works. And we took it on amongst ourselves with our little capital that we have and the intellectual capital that we bring to the table to question seriously the status of capitalism and what the role of money is, including philanthropy. And just up one more comment to get the conversation going. I mean, the pure philanthropists are as bad as the pure capitalists, as far as I'm concerned, right? And the pure communists, because purists, they always define their success at the expense of somebody else. And how bad is that? We cannot define our successes anymore at the expense of anybody else. We're here together, and I think capital needs to play a role. We can talk about blended capital, new ways of deploying capital in a way that ensures positive impact, and how to get this going, from seed stage to scale up. So maybe, wherever you want to go on that one.
Okay. I think the values are fairly clear. No, it's great, and I appreciate you sharing that journey, and having been a little bit part of it, it was a set of fascinating discussions. Lisa, you talked about there's 5 different vehicles that you and Charly have been using for investing and impact investing. I think because of the time constraints we have, we're going to ask you to focus on the KL Felicitas Foundation. So the values are clear about where Charly and Lisa are coming from with this work. So we're going to talk about the foundation, which is one of the vehicles that they use. Talk a little bit about how impact investing is playing out in the foundation. Let's talk about that first in terms of strategy, and then I think we're going to have them share a couple of quick case studies and some of the investments they have made. So do you want to start first?
Yeah, I think we can do this as a combined discussion. So we have a pretty sophisticated strategy. In fact, if I was to put it up here on the screen, it would look like one of these Viennese layer cakes with chocolate. Sacre only has 3 layers. We have at least 8 layers, I think, darling.
I'm from Innsbruck, not Vienna.
Yeah. So our layer cake looks like this. How many of you are familiar with foundations and how people usually, the 5% and all that jazz? Okay, good. So we never do anything the way anyone else does. So we looked at that 5% and we said, woo, there's a big 95%. What's going on with that? And so we said, well, we're going to, when we have our impact investing strategy, we're going to look right on through the 95% and just carry it across. So this is what it looks like. In the 5% carve out that you have to give out, 2% of that is going to grants. 3%, I think I have it backwards. 3% is going, no, 2, it's 2 or 3. Half is going to grants, but there's a kicker there and I'll come back to it. The other half is going to PRIs, which we would call probably very risky PRIs, but we absolutely expect our money back on some level. Perhaps maybe we get it back and no upside, but we're not investing in things that, we're not doing any forgivable PRIs. That's not in our vocabulary. Then we did a carve out from the 95%, and that's 5% going into what we call very robust PRIs. And the reason we did that was in 2008, 2009, our PRIs performed beautifully. They've performed better than market. So we thought, wow, let's just get some more PRIs in there so that we continue with this good performance in our portfolio. And then we have carve-outs for what we call social component investments. That's a very small percentage of it. These are where you have an investment that might not in and of itself be social, but it might then generate income and then give that income to a not-for-profit, something like that. There's a couple of those out there. We also believe very strong, one of our defining pieces in our foundation is sustainability, and I would say more than the foundation, it's a defining metric in our lives. And so, irregardless of the mission of the foundation, we are always looking, everything we do, we're looking at the sustainability of it in a holistic way. And so we have, in our portfolio, we're looking for investments that demonstrate sustainability in a variety of different ways. And so we're looking also for, I'd say, diversity in the types of investments that we're doing within that bucket. And we use it as a placeholder while we're looking for mission-related investments, which are also in our portfolio. Now, the mission of our foundation is that we support, on a global basis, social entrepreneurs and helping to develop and scale those businesses globally so that they can have the most impact that they can, with a focus on the rural area, because the rural area is kind of a tough nut, given that it's not as cost-effective as urban, although our kids recently said to us, why don't you do the urban area, because there's more people there. So that's something that we're probably going to have a discussion about at the next board meeting. So I think,
I wanted to actually talk a little bit about modern portfolio theory and asset allocation, because obviously, that's a topic that will have to be debated in the impact context and what risk really means. And most financial professionals pretend as if nothing happened in 2008 and 2009, and they advise you with the same predictably wrong, suggestions that actually led you to, go down in your portfolio of 30–40%. And the reason for that is because the modern portfolio theory has at least two major flaws, and we need to fix that. So hopefully at Columbia and other universities, people like you work on that actively, to come up with one that doesn't really have the major two flaws. And the first one is that they don't tell you is modern portfolio theory works great for you if you have an individual portfolio, but if everybody around you moves in the same direction at the same time, then the uncorrelated asset class perception that they say is actually true is not true anymore, as we have all experienced, right? And so what better way to protect yourselves from that than going into something that long-term is going to be a sure winner, and that's holistic sustainability. You don't need to have a PhD in macroeconomics to understand that limited resources is going to be a defining moment for the planet with 9.5 billion people soon, or whatever, give it 200 million, right? And so the issue is that people maximize their financial return at the expense of long-term sustainability, and we don't do that knowingly anymore. And so to give you a sense of what that means is we directed our portfolio managers and investment managers not to invest in non-renewable commodities. Now, are commodities important to hedge your portfolio? Sure, right? But we invest in renewable timber, in modern land use management, and we'll talk about that, how we measure the impact of this. And we don't do extractive technologies because we think it's not good for us and the planet, and therefore we don't do it. But capital moves in. We cannot prevent that from happening, but hopefully the metrics will be aligned, and instead of measuring cutting down trees without replacing them as a positive GDP movement, for everybody, which doesn't make sense, right? So we need to fix the accounting system overall to align with impact as well, such that these things don't occur and become internalities. Now, having said this, so the second big issue with modern portfolio theory is, of course, externalities. And so Lisa and I, we need to show the investment community that, hey, by the way, if for renewable timber we have to take a little bit of haircut, which you don't necessarily have to take financially, of course we're going to take that, 100, 200 basis points. for renewable timber as opposed to non-renewable timber. Hello, why would we not do that, right? And I mean, these are no-brainers for us, but we're a little bit still not even a niche market, and so we need to figure out how to move from, I guess, a little bit visionary or something, to more a niche market. And so, but having said this, we start with an asset allocation because we do believe that cash has a different characteristic than long short, than commodities. And that's why Lisa made the comment in the beginning, impact investing is not an asset class. We invest our cash in impact, we invest our longs in impact, we invest commodities in impact, we invest long short in impact, and all the sub-asset classes that you come up with, we invest in impact. And therefore, to us, it's really overlaying a modern portfolio with impact is the right strategy. And in 5 to 10, well, probably in 10 to 15 years, we can drop impact because all investments will have to prove their positive impact, otherwise they will not be investable anymore. And the people who knowingly, have the side effects and externalities that they're not accounted for will have to, be accounted for. And so that's what we're working on.
You go, Charlie.
I want to get to measurement in a second. I think what I'd like you to do, Charly and Lisa, is each of you, and I know this is kind of like picking among your children, but could you share what one of your favorite investments in your portfolio at the foundation, and talk about, just give us an overview on it and why you feel it's an important example of impact investing and what you're trying to do.
Just
so Lisa,
one?
your example, then Charlie, give an example.
Just one?
Just one. Well,
See, one of the problems of being an impact investor is you know all your investments and you know the people that are getting the impact from it. So
Right.
it's very hard to pick one. But can I do two?
All right, two.
Okay.
Start out with one.
Okay. I'll start out with one that's a U.S.-based one. I have a real sweet one that's overseas, and that's the one I'll do second when you allow me. So the first one is a land conservation deal, and we own some properties, so we understand the concept because we have not a big holding, 453 acres, but we know the issues around land conservation and stewardship. And so when this deal was presented to us and we took a look at it, and there's a lot of these deals floating around, by the way. And in fact, now we're starting to see some of these appear overseas, which is interesting. In the old days, what was happening were the not-for-profits were looking to take their grant capital and work in partnership with other not-for-profits, purchase the property, do the cleanup, if you will, set aside easements, maybe even bring down or change the boundary lines, maybe merge properties to make it better for the ecosystem of the property. And this was also being done with private landowners who were seeing the financial upside. So you had not-for-profits doing this, and then you had individual private landowners doing it. And one of the players in this circle realized, oh my goodness, what if we were to raise a fund with enlightened folks who want to invest in it, a for-profit fund. We raise the capital to purchase the property. We partner with the not-for-profits to do the thing that they really want to focus on. They don't want to buy land. They don't want to be land stewards. They want to just do the conservation easements. They want to do the cleanup and whatnot. And so he did that. He got together with the Nature Conservancy, and you name all the players, and depending where they're working, they partner. But here's the sweetener, because we wouldn't invest in it if this wasn't part of the deal. They work with the local community. Because often the problem historically has been that that the not-for-profit world was parachuting into communities that already were struggling financially and not asking the question, no, we're going to set this aside in conservation, but sorry, it was a working ranch, but we're closing it down now. You guys go find a different job. So this deal had all those pieces in it, and we decided that we want to invest in it, and they have done a tremendous job. It's a patient move on our part. I think the whole package is maybe an 8 to 10 year. Beartooth Capital is the name. And they're coming out with a second fund because the first one was so successful, and they're in the middle of the raise, and I think we're going to invest in the second one as well.
I think that impact investing will only really go to scale when the social impact metrics are correlated with the financial returns. And otherwise, it's going to stay an externality to the market itself, and therefore will not scale unless the market goes totally south and we have a new system, which I don't anticipate. And so that type of financial instrument is actually just being innovated right now. So only the first ones are coming to the market. So on the sustainability side and the green side, you can make quite a bit of money by investing in things that the market will understand very soon, will become internalities, so you get the financial benefit of this. And land use, mixed land use management is actually recognized now by the market as being a good financial investment, because there's people who pay for that type of mixed use. Now on the social side, we're about 10 years behind with these externalities, and it takes visionaries and carve-outs and part of portfolios to really invest in the social externalities. We believe fundamentally that even if you were to solve the resource constraints of the planet, that if we don't also solve the social injustices on a fundamental level, that still humanity would not have a good time on the planet. And therefore we don't partition it out that way, but the market is forcing us to think about it differently with respect to expected financial returns, because it's obviously not there yet from a market perspective. And so when we saw actually the social impact bond work in the UK, we were all over that, because our friend Arthur Wood, who was the brainchild behind that, and really saying, why can't we really figure out a way where we reward the investors if and only if a social impact is actually met? And by doing a three-way partnership between the state and the government that actually saves taxpayers money by doing that, a preventative approach as opposed to patching up after the fact, and much cheaper, by the way, right? With the NGO sector that gets a predictable money stream from social investors, impact investors like ourselves, who then get the return if and only if we meet the social impact. In this particular instance, what they are working on in their first social impact bond in the UK is the re-incarceration rate of young people in the UK within 12 months of them being released from prison. And that's currently at 40%. And if they could lower that by half, meaning that only 20% of people who get freed up from the prisons would get reincarcerated within 1 year, the savings to society would be tremendous. And we're only talking about first order of savings, right? Not even the secondary issues of all the issues, family issues and social issues that are very tough to measure. But just how much does it take to incarcerate a person, right? And it turns out that in California, probably we have the highest cost, and that's why Arnie wanted to ship them all to Mexico, which didn't bail out, right? But in the UK, it's very, 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 very expensive too. And so we invest in that type of deal where the government then says, through an intermediary bank that's newly incorporated to manage it, you get up to 13% return if proven intervention actually works. And the proven thing is done with the old science and old methodology of making sure that you do a test without that intervention, and if indeed one is 40% and the other one is 20%, then we get up to 13% return. We get zero return if it doesn't work. We're okay with that for part of our portfolio. We are actually so okay with it that we want to, one of our quantitative metrics is actually to be a first mover, and by moving our small capital into these types of efforts, like compared with Capital One, they were happy to get $500,000. We don't have $5 million for a single investment, right? And but by helping them to prove their model, we are then enabling them to go to the next stage. So social impact bonds, the first investment that we did, and there was 2 US foundations that participated in it, KL Felicitas and the Rockefeller Foundation, is just the first instrument like this. And we want to enable the market to understand that this is doable, and by doing that, shining the light on them and saying, now go. And there's an effort now in the US that has been capitalized from the government as well, with 400,000 grant capital recently, to evaluate in Boston and Massachusetts and in other areas of how to replicate that in the US context. We think that that is a stellar opportunity for creating new vehicles that we deserve in order to get the positive impact that we want.
Just a real quick, I forgot to give why this isn't a for-profit model, Beartooth. And that is because in the not-for-profit guys, they had a limited market that they could turn that property back to. In a for-profit, they have not only the not-for-profit sector that they could resell the property to, but also for-profit, so they can sell it to high-net-worth individuals who would like to have large land holdings in, let's say, Idaho, with already preset easements and conservation easements and all of the issues of land degradation addressed in advance. So that's why it's a for-profit.
All right. You know, Charlie, one more question for you and Lisa, and then we're going to go back to you, and because you had several good questions, we want to get to those, and we're running out of time. Can you guys touch again a little bit on, you started to talk about it, Charlie. I think it's, by the way, I thought there's social impact bonds and Beartooth Capital couldn't be two very different examples, so thank you. That was great. Let's talk a little bit more about the measurement issue, if you will, and how you're feeling about that. Because I think when you talk to, broadly speaking, traditional Wall Street people and they want to shoot down impact investing, they go right after financial return and trying to balance financial return with social return. There's a lot of work that's been done by the Global Impact Investing Network and with leaders like Charly and Lisa on looking at this measurement question. So why don't you talk about that a little bit and how you think about that, and then we're going to go to your questions.
Yeah. Okay. So we're a small foundation. We cannot afford to, and it would make sense to develop a proprietary system for doing metric measuring. Frankly, we spent most of the last decade trying to prove financial returns in impact investing. But all the time we were doing that, we really wanted, and we had anecdotal, plus we had some quantitative data from our investees, but we really wanted something that was a little more, had more rigor, not just within the individual investment, but something we could apply across our portfolio and then across the multiple portfolios that we have. So at the time that we kind of came up for air after proving the point on, and actually 2008 enabled us to really prove the point on financial returns, that's when we said, okay, now let's take a look at what we could do in terms of measuring impact, and voila. IRIS was just coming out on the landscape. We'd heard about it. We started early discussions with the Rockefeller Foundation and the folks working in IRIS. And we looked at the early beta and picked a few things that we thought would be good, started talking to our investees, started collecting data. It was not onerous. That was the first observation. It was actually quite simple. The second thing is it was a real aha moment for us with our investees. We started to have a conversation on a slightly different level because we realized that some of the ways people were measuring things were vastly different. We were assuming that this number meant that, and they were saying, no, no, no. When we say number of customers served, our number includes all the family members rather than just the single person who got the water, right? So we had this kind of nice little sweep through our portfolio, and all of a sudden re-understanding the investments that we have and the impact that they're having. And so I think I'll let you take. Yeah.
So just a mega argument because it's being thrown our way from the conventional community, criticizing whatever we choose, of course, and not realizing that their measurement of predictive financial success is, they confuse this with truth. You know, if you talk to people and you tell them how's the business doing, they say EPS and revenue, and everything else, and that's what they think the company is doing, right? And so even so we're going to go to metrics, and metrics are very, very important. We are not going to fall into the same trap that we confuse the impact metrics with the holistic impact that everything has. And we always combine quantitative with qualitative metrics and do not allow us to not talk about things with judgment behind it, because and with our observation behind it. And we get asked a lot about how do you really prove? Yeah. How do you scientifically prove that you have the impact that you claim you have? And I say, well, we're going to do a controlled study. And no, I don't say this.
Triple blind.
Yeah, because I think Einstein, already 120 years proved that the observer has a big impact on the observed, and we know that from both meditators know that, and we know that. So you cannot really use the old methodology of showing that you have to prove, and therefore we cannot also fall into the trap of repeating nonsensical types of proofs that don't make sense. Having said this, we do believe in metrics. We are very rigorous about that, and we are embarking on longitudinal studies. One of the impeding issues in the sector is that we don't have a lot of case studies, right? And so through our work with Tonic, which we co-founded as a global impact investing network that's taking off right now, we're going to analyze all the deals that we have made, and we have made about 20 deals within Tonic right now. We're doing the same with DASRA Social Impact, which is one of the incubator models that we have in India to help actually create the deal flow that we deserve and do peer-to-peer learning. So those are all topics that go hand in hand with developing the ecosystem, both on the supply side, the demand side, and the infrastructure side. And metrics play a huge role in that.
So are you all familiar with Gears and Iris? Gears, anyone? Okay, few. Iris, everyone knows that Iris is a taxonomy. It's not the end game. So it's just really about us having the same definition for what the thing being measured is. And then Gears is actually a rating system similar to Morningstar, but it's for the social impact side of the equation. And this is also a product that evolved out of B-Lab is running it. It evolved out of the Rockefeller Foundation, initially funded that work. And they really are. So we're right now in the process of applying both Iris and Gears to our portfolio, to Tonic, as Charlie talked. But also, there are other applications for this. I'm on the board of the Philanthropy Workshop West on the West Coast. And we're actually looking through the metrics in Iris as for two things. One is to see if there's anything that lines up. But the second one is to inspire us about how we do metric measuring, about the impact we're having on the folks that go through our program. So I think, metrics, we've gotten really excited because at the end of the day, I give you a vignette for what this means. I sat in a meeting in Silicon Valley. We're a small foundation, and I mean really small relative to the folks who were at the table. These guys were in the billion category. And there were 20 people there. We went around the room, and everyone talked about what they were doing in metric measuring. Not a single one of these people could show us any data. They all had proprietary systems, and often the proprietary system translated into every staff person has their own way of measuring it. And then they got to me, and I had just had the first report that we'd been able to do with the Iris thing, and I had a little scatter plot thing, a little thing where I had all our investments, I had the metrics here, and then I had all the dots showing where we were having impact. So I held it up. I can tell you that all 19 other people at the table ran up to me afterward and said, "How did you do that?" So, and that was just Iris. That was using the taxonomy, combing what we had, and then plotting it. And it cost us, just so you know, what the price tag was for that, about $4,000.
One more comment about
Yes.
this, because we have a portfolio. We have about 35 investments in our portfolio out of the foundation. We have more investments from other entities that we're not as public about. And so we deploy about 5 metrics across the portfolio. 2 of them are non-financial, 3 of them are financial, because our vision is to help social enterprises grow sustainably. And if the financial piece of that, they need capital, the right level of capital at the right level of time, and that includes grants, social capital, and commercial capital, is something that we see as a leading indicator over time. So Iris itself just gives you the definition of the capital that comes in. We overlay that with an observation of how the capital actually that comes in changes over time as a leading indicator of becoming more sustainable, right? And then we have sector-specific metrics that about another handful, not too many. And we are just coming out with the first measurement for 2010. And you can go on our website, klfelicitasfoundation.org. There's the case study with Jin on there, and all of our data and our returns. So if you want to follow up on that. And then we have, of course, the qualitative metrics that we subject all of our investments through by going through a due diligence process that includes that methodology now.
Great.
And it goes without saying that
Yes.
this is just the beginning, that the
Right.
real story is going to be 5 years from now when we can show you what happened over the 5-year span on all our variety of investments.
And that includes the 100 Tonic investments, the 50 DASRA investments, the 50 investments of KL Felicitas Foundation, so we'll have some significant data.
Excellent. All right. I'm going to do my best, Oprah. I'm going to go out here, and we're going to get some of more of your questions. Karan, you want to go first? All right. Please identify yourself and your affiliation, if you have one.
Sure. I'm Carmen Testel, the president of the Community Development Venture Capital Alliance. We're a group of venture capital funds that provide equity investments for businesses in low-income communities. And I'm curious to hear about how you think about risk. We, as you can imagine, we're a pretty high-risk investment. And I also used to make program-related investments at the Ford Foundation, and our attitude there, I think, was indicative of what you see in a lot of social investment, which is, we'll take a lower return, we'll make a 1% loan, but we really don't want to lose our money. So how do you think about return, risk, and then return, both social return, but in particular financial return? Are you willing to take that higher risk with the possibility of higher financial return?
So that's a very valid question, and we have a differentiated approach, a portfolio approach to risk, where we say we have X amount of dollars per year that we actually invest in individual social enterprises. And we have a very different return expectation and exit expectation for those types of investments than for other investments. And so it's too big of a topic, but just briefly, for impact first investments that go from seed stage to startup stage, we just want to get our capital back, and we organize the next round of capital coming in, maybe even with a blend again. So that's success for us, right? Now, that's not success for other parts of our portfolio. In other parts of our portfolio, we cannot take as much risk because we need to maintain, for obvious reasons, we want to maintain the investment power of the portfolio over time. And therefore, in other parts of the portfolio, we don't make these types of risky investments, but spread the risk as much as possible, still with a lens of what is the impact that we can achieve on a high level, right? So it's really two major buckets, and then we segment more even according to asset class. So one thing that we are asked a lot, and then I'll let Lisa add to this, what can you do now in impact? And that's move your cash to a bank where you know how they invest it. We don't want to not know where our money goes. And we don't give money to banks that invest in the war machinery because we don't believe in that type of machinery. If you believe, that's okay, right? We don't want to place a value judgment, but whatever your impact is, you need to align your money with your values. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time eventually, when you migrate beyond this life.
It's about being conscious about your capital, and I can't tell you how many folks we work with who have no idea what their capital is doing.
I think the capital reflects who you are. You cannot hide behind that, as far as I'm concerned. Just like your life. I mean, if you think somebody else is running your life, it's you.
Back quickly to the risk thing. I think the more risk you have in an investment, we always lead with a very open discussion about risk mitigation. And we have high touch with those who are very high risk, and we keep that high touch and monitor that through the portfolio. So
if you think that we're on the verge of maybe exploring another big blip, in the financial markets, what better hedge than going into impact investing? Impact investing actually doesn't go down as much because the market really understands, and we have seen that. We can prove it with 35 investments at least. And which I didn't expect is they actually recovered. The sustainability investments recovered faster. Now that means again that the market is much smarter than we give it credit for, right?
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Hi. Hi, John Walker from Echoing Green. I just wanted to follow up on one one comment you made there about the values that you place upon the use of your capital in making investments. A lot of our fellows are going on from seed stage, the capital that we give them, to raise further capital for growth, expansion, whatever. And we don't see many institutional funds operating at the kind of 250, 750K level. And interpretation is that the funds there's limited possibility as you create those funds because all the values are so different. You can't aggregate investors around a common goal. I just wonder if you can comment on that.
Yeah, we see leading lights there. So Lisa and I, with my European background, we work in Europe quite a bit on tonic. And when we talk to banks like ABN AMRO, Triodos Bank, their private clientele is now interested in actually aggregating their capital to impact private deals. And so we're working strategically with Tonic to really line up these types of partners as potential exits for our Tonic deals. Because what we don't want to have happen is that the impact gets lost in the next round of investments. It's early days on this. We do not see the same enlightenment, in the US, because the US fiduciaries, they hide behind an interpretation of fiduciary responsibility that frankly does not make sense, and that's year-over-year profitability as opposed to impact for the grandkids of the pensioners that they service, right? So if you have the same discussion in Amsterdam, it's very different. The people who give their money to the pension funds say invest it, but don't mess up the future of my grandkids. Now that's, that's what I would expect, because why would you invest in something that permanently, makes the planet really a bad place to live for your kids and grandkids? And so I think the lawyers are just out of control in this country, pretending that you can't do all these things. It's like, somebody mentioned for-profit, not-for-profit. You use the incorporation model that maximizes your impact, not what the lawyers tell you to do. As entrepreneurs, you want to figure out how to move the needle forward and be positive, right? And then you hold the professionals accountable for supporting that, not the other way around.
Okay. We have time for one more question. All right. Yes, ma'am. And then we'll wrap up.
Hi, my name is Maria Teresa Del Rosario, and I'm a first-year MBA at COGOT at American University in DC. Previously, pardon me, I was a nonprofit manager for 10 years. I ran a national leadership development program for recruiting community organizers across the country. 2007, I would meet with funders and tell a really strong qualitative story. I lift up a program participant, and that was good. And then flash forward to 2010, I was being asked quantitative questions. Pretty much that's why I'm in an MBA program. I didn't have the skills to weave a quantitative story. My first B in statistics exam aside, I think I'm gaining those skills. But what I'm wondering, we're asking a lot of the field people who are implementing these really life-changing and transformative programs to tell a quantitative story. And then on the other side, as I'm sitting in accounting and looking at balance sheets, and I'm thinking, well, how are we measuring this value added and this human capital? And I'm asking this question for all our quantitative side, and I hear you in the iris. What is this bridge as you're moving between these two worlds with the quantitative and the qualitative? What beyond the metrics are you challenging people who think or have their experience is quantitative?
We were just debating who was going to take that. So what we see this energy quite a bit in the investing world, because often we're looking at folks that might have come from the not-for-profit side, identified that they had a fee structure and a revenue-generating possibility that maybe they ought to do a for-profit, and then we see them fail miserably because they don't have the rigor. Frankly, the not-for-profit side is still coming up to speed on the rigor it actually needs to have. This isn't a for-profit, not-for-profit question. This is just simple rigor around financial metrics. Everyone who does a business has to have financial metrics. That's just the way it is. And in fact, often you'll meet a lot of people who have for-profits who say that they're actually not for-profit because they're in the red all the time. So it's really this kind of gray soup. But the bottom line is, it's good that you're in here doing an MBA. I wish all not-for-profits thought the way you did and had that rigor, because then we would have not-for-profits that actually are very sustainable, that understand their revenue model. I'm on a not-for-profit actually, and we are now cash flow positive because I introduced with a team of other people. We got together and we said, look, there's a way for us to generate fees here and to target donations in a way that we have a sustainable cash flow over time, and we just hit our targets ahead of schedule. You have to have your eyes open. You have to be looking at all of the indicators, and you have to work them to move them toward the target that you want. And so I'd love to hear what you're doing with the not-for-profit after you're done with the program, and how you translate these skill set to a new model.
I think it's really important that we learn the vocabulary of both sides. It was tough for me as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur to understand the NGO word and talk lingo, but I can now, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to MBAs to understand why the system is so bad, right? Because if you don't really understand the system, how it works, how can you fix it? And so we're learning MBAs and learning how macroeconomists really think, is important, because otherwise we cannot figure out how to really do it right.
Charly, Lisa, one or two final comments. Where do you think this is all going to be in 5 years, impact investing, if you had to guess?
Mm-hmm. So I think, because of the work that we do, we see both on the supply and the demand side that there is, movement to go from seed stage to very early startup, very early niche. We should not confuse that there is a silver bullet out there right now that says within 3 years this is going to be mainstream. It's not. It's not going to be mainstream. And because it's a systemic issue, it's not a simple add-on to the system. And therefore, it will take a few years eventually we will reach a tipping point. Tipping points cannot be predicted on when that will happen. But having both, more investable entities and having more capital come in that really understands that will enable the intermediaries to actually make business models that they can make money on, which is important, because if the intermediaries, I'm on the board of Impact Assets, these are new intermediaries that create new services and new products for the industry, and everybody who works in that space should be commended in really being early stage on that. I anticipate that the first fund of funds are going to be successful next year. I think that the first social funds that actually do attract institutional capital, will go over the finishing line in Q1 and Q2 of this coming year. And I think that new funds that really deal with resource constraints in a modern way, like eco-assets, that doesn't pretend that the resources that the universe has given us are free, right? And really start accounting for that to the accounting challenge is going to be, we will see more of that, and they will all be an order of magnitude bigger than today. And
Great.
that would be good progress, but way not enough, to avert the crisis.
Right.
So 5 years out, I think I've already seen some really interesting trends, and that's, I think, around the use of philanthropic capital and for-profit capital, and how we're coming together in partnerships that are looking at the life cycle of a business and then making smart partnership decisions about who's going to invest when and provide which service to move that not-for-profit the social for-profit in a direction where it can maximize its impact and also be sustainable.
One trend that I just know is going to happen is that the crowdsourcing and crowdfunding finally is going to be connected with the commercial networks. So over the next 2 or 3 years, people like us will start doing that connection, and that's going to be a huge trend in essence. Movement entrepreneurs are going to be social entrepreneurs now.
Great.
And the other one is silo breakdown. We're already seeing silo breakdown where you've got the philanthropic side with the grant-only mentality, and then you've got high net worth individuals and some foundations doing impact investing. But what we are seeing more and more, I just did a deal, my little sweet deal that I didn't get to tell you about. This is an interesting one. A European foundation has basically shuttled capital to the US, formed a 501c3. Why the heck did they do that? They did it because they want to take advantage of the ability of a US not-for-profit to invest equity capital in a social for-profit startup.
Transcontinental delisting global investments is going to be the norm.
Okay.
And they're one of the investors in my sweet little deal.
All right. All right. A couple of things to wrap up. Number one, on this measurement issue, 2 resources. First of all, Mario Marino's new book called Leap of Reason, you can download it free off of iBooks or go to leapofreason.org, is as clear and concise a discussion on the issue of measurement in nonprofits. Very good book. The other thing I would remind you about measurement is something that Albert Einstein mentioned. Charlie referenced Einstein a little earlier. Always remember what Einstein said. He said, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And that's important to keep in mind. Ladies and gentlemen, John Adams, a composer, wrote a great piece of music called Short Ride on a Fast Machine, and that is indeed what we have had this morning. And it's a little unfair because this is a deep and dense topic, but a very important topic, and where you've been has been on the vanguard of this topic with 2 of the leaders. So can we have a round of applause for Charly and Lisa?